Your leadership style is too inflexible for our culture, Victoria announced to the entire management team. Not privately, not with any prior notice, but right there during the Monday morning meeting with every department head present. My name is Colin Drake. I'm 47 years old. I serve as operations director at Iron Veil Robotics for 7 years, until about 10 minutes ago. I gave a single nod, closed my laptop, and said, "Understood." Victoria had been president for barely 8 weeks, brought in by investors eager for someone with charisma and forward thinking to make the company more appealing for acquisition. She wore designer outfits, tossed around terms like synergistic alignment, and had never once set foot on our production floor. I cleared out my office without a fuss, 22 minutes total. One cardboard box held personal items, the other contained the binders I had carefully built over the years. Vendor lists, pricing models, delivery timelines. The hidden framework keeping everything intact. "Colin, this isn't personal," Victoria said, appearing in my doorway as I packed. Her voice was gentler now that we were alone. "We just need someone with a more cooperative approach." I kept packing. The last 4 quarters speak for themselves. Numbers aren't everything in today's business world. I didn't bother pointing out that those numbers, the $12 million in annual revenue, up from $5 million when I began, were the result of relationships, of trust slowly and deliberately built with suppliers across the Midwest, of handshakes, factory visits, and remembering the names of people's children. Victoria would never understand that my so-called rigid leadership style was the reason raw materials kept arriving during the 2023 supply chain breakdown. That my supposedly outdated methods were why we could price our products 6% below competitors and still maintain solid profit margins. I shook hands with my team on the way out and wished them the best. I meant it. They were good people who deserved better than what was coming. On the drive home, my phone lit up with messages, stunned coworkers, baffled suppliers who had already heard the news somehow. I didn't reply. Instead, I turned toward the Mississippi River and pulled into an overlook. For the first time in 7 years, I had nowhere to be at 1 p.m. on a Monday. "Congratulations on your freedom," I muttered, watching barges push against the current. I knew what came next. I'd seen this scenario before. The signs were already there. The business school buzzwords in Victoria's office, the supplier portal software she had mentioned, the consulting firm she'd hired to modernize procurement. What she didn't realize was that every major supplier agreement had been personally negotiated by me, built on mutual respect, not software tools. There was no succession plan because no one had asked for one. Now, no one ever would. I joined Iron Veil when it was still a struggling operation in an old warehouse by the rail yard. Their product, specialized components for factory automation, was strong, but their delivery consistency couldn't support major contracts. The owner, Harold Blackwell, was a brilliant engineer but lacked any logistics instincts. "I need someone to fix this damn supply chain mess," Harold said during my interview, pointing at a whiteboard filled with delays and overages. "You military guys get systems. Make it work, and I'll make it worth your time." After 15 years as a logistics officer in the Army, I knew how to create reliable supply chains, not by strong-arming vendors, which never works long-term, but by fostering mutual reliance. Partnerships where both sides had a stake in success. I spent that first year on the road, visiting every key supplier, learning their strengths, limitations, and goals. Some were family-owned shops in places like Lima, Ohio, or Dubuque, Iowa. Others were branches of large corporations where building rapport with a procurement manager could mean priority during material shortages. By the 3rd year, we had the most dependable supply network in the region. While competitors paused production due to part shortages, we stayed operational. Our on-time delivery hit 98.6%. Customer retention climbed to 91%. Harold saw the value. "Whatever you're doing with those suppliers, keep at it," he'd say during our monthly reviews. "Bringing you on was the best call I ever made." But Harold sold the company last spring, said he wanted to retire, spend time fishing, and see his grandkids. The private equity group that bought Iron Veil started professionalizing immediately. New software, revised reporting formats, new performance metrics, and then came Victoria. The first crack showed up in her second week. She canceled my quarterly supplier visit, calling it a waste of money in the digital era. The second came during a strategy session where I warned about changing vendor payment terms. They'll adjust, she said breezily. We're too big to lose. The third? I overheard her telling someone that operations were stuck in the past and needed fresh blood. I could have pushed back harder. Could have explained that our edge came from the very old-school tactics she was tearing down. That our suppliers stayed loyal because of trust, not transactions. But I knew the pattern. I'd seen it in the military. New leadership eager to leave their mark, even if it meant breaking what was already working. So I began copying contact lists, backing up my notes, getting ready. When it finally happened, the only surprise was the way it was done. Publicly. 3 days after my termination, I got a call from Thomas Franklin, chief engineer of Fwin Security, one of our top clients. Heard what happened, he said. Their loss. Listen, you free for lunch? No agenda, just two old guys griping about the world. We met at a steakhouse downtown. Thomas was nearing 60, with weathered hands that showed the decades he'd spent building things before moving into leadership. So, what's next for Colin Drake? He asked after we placed our orders. Taking some time to weigh my options. Thomas nodded. Heard from anyone at Iron Vale? Radio silence. Not shocked. Victoria's already stirring things up. Rolled out a new vendor management system yesterday. Mandatory for all suppliers. He watched my expression carefully. You didn't implement that, did you? No. All our vendor relationships were personal, direct lines, real people addressing real issues. That's what I thought. Thomas leaned forward. Look, Colin, I'll be upfront with you. We're already seeing delays coming from Iron Vale. Nothing catastrophic yet, but the red flags are starting to appear. Your replacement is some fresh graduate from business school, talks a lot about strategic procurement, but doesn't know the difference between grade 5 and grade 8 fasteners. I took a sip of water, trying to keep my reaction neutral. Things were deteriorating quicker than I had predicted. Not your headache anymore, Thomas went on. But here's something that might interest you. We Own Bowworks is on the hunt for someone to revamp their operations. Their CEO, Julia Winters, is an old friend. When I heard what happened to you, I dropped your name. I appreciate that. She wants to meet. They're expanding fast, and their current systems can't keep up. Sound familiar? It did, exactly like Iron Vale 7 years ago. As we wrapped up lunch, my phone vibrated. A text from Harold, my former boss. Just heard. What the hell were they thinking? Call me. On the drive home, something inside me shifted. It wasn't anger. I moved past that. It was colder, more deliberate. Victoria had made a fatal mistake. She believed the systems I built were easily replicable. Their relationships could be replaced by platforms and generic emails. That suppliers would stay with Iron Vale out of convenience or obligation. What she failed to see was that I had structured every significant contract to require annual renegotiation, no automatic renewals, no boilerplate terms. Each agreement was custom-tailored, with me as the sole point of contact. It wasn't sabotage, it was just the way I operated. Personal responsibility was built into the framework. My framework. That evening, I received my first message from Iron Vale since being let go. Not from Victoria, but from purchasing. Urgent. Need vendor contact info from Midwest Precision. Their rep says they only communicate with Colin Drake. I didn't respond. Instead, I returned Harold's call. Then contacted Julia Winters at We Own Bowworks. Then 3 other companies that had tried to recruit me in the past. By Friday, I had 4 strong offers. By Monday, I had made my choice. I wasn't just going to start over. I was going to show Victoria exactly what she had thrown away. 2 weeks after being terminated, I accepted the Chief Operations Officer position at We Own Bowworks. They produce specialized lab equipment, different products, but similar logistical issues. Julia Winters, the CEO, granted me full control to redesign their operations from scratch. We need what you built at Iron Vale, she said during our final meeting. Our growth is outstripping our infrastructure. Fix that, and there's equity in it for you. I spent my first day walking the factory floor, talking to workers, getting the raw truth about what was and wasn't working. By day 3, I had pinpointed the biggest issues. unreliable deliveries, inconsistent quality from key suppliers, and bloated inventory processes. That Friday, my personal phone rang. Victoria Lang's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was polite but uneasy. "Colin, hope you're doing well. We're having some issues with supplier transitions. Wondering if you might be open to a short consultation, paid, of course." I didn't call back. Monday morning, my assistant forwarded me a message that had come through our general inquiry form. Urgent request from Victoria Lang, president of Iron Veil Robotics. I deleted it without reading past the first line. By Wednesday, she was ringing my personal line every few hours. I blocked her number. On Thursday, she appeared at the reception desk at We Own Bauworks. "Mr. Drake is tied up in meetings all day," the receptionist said, following my standing instructions for any Iron Veil visitors. "Tell him it's urgent," Victoria insisted. "We have a major production delay that's about to cost us millions." I watch her from my office via the security feed. She waited for 30 minutes before leaving, her perfect facade finally cracking. That afternoon, I got a detailed email from Brian Cooper, my former assistant at Iron Veil. We kept in touch, and he had become my informal insider. "Total chaos," he wrote. "Midwest Precision increased prices by 15% under the new contract. Valari Components delayed deliveries by 6 weeks. 3 other suppliers are suddenly having capacity problems, but only with Iron Veil's orders. Victoria has called 4 emergency management meetings this week alone." I hadn't told those vendors to retaliate. I hadn't needed to. They saw how I was treated and formed their own opinions about the new regime. Many had partnered with me for years across several companies. They knew who kept promises and who didn't. The next morning, Harold Blackwell called. "The board's starting to raise concerns," he said. Harold still held a 15% share in Iron Veil after selling. "Victoria is blaming the vendor breakdowns on you. Says you poisoned the well on your way out." "I've had zero interaction with any Iron Veil suppliers," I replied calmly. And that was true. "Since I left," I replied honestly. "I believe you, but she's convinced herself she's the victim here." Harold paused. "They lost the Braxton contract yesterday. Couldn't guarantee delivery timelines. Braxton Industries, a client I had personally nurtured for 3 years before they finally came on board. One of Iron Veil's largest accounts. Not my responsibility anymore," I said. "Of course not," Harold agreed. "By the way, how's the new position? Different hurdles? Similar solutions?" I paused. "I might need to secure some additional manufacturing capacity soon. Know anyone looking to sublease factory space?" Harold chuckled. "Funny you should mention that. I might have some leverage to assist with that very soon." A week later, I received an official letter from Iron Veil's legal team, accusing me of violating non-solicitation clauses by allegedly interfering with their vendor partnerships. I forwarded it to Julia's legal counsel without a word. Their reply came back within a few hours. No basis, no proof, no issue. They were correct. I hadn't approached anyone. I had merely stepped aside and let the natural consequences unfold. That night, I slept more soundly than I had in months. A month into my new role at Weiss-San, I got a message on LinkedIn from Ella Lehner Hayes, Iron Veil's head of finance. We'd worked well together during my tenure. Both of us detail-oriented, process-focused professionals who valued outcomes over politics. "Can we meet?" was all she wrote. We picked a coffee shop located halfway between our offices. Ella Lehner looked drained, the sort of deep, lingering exhaustion that comes from fighting battles you know you can't win. "They're blaming you for everything," she said once we sat down. "The supplier issues, the production delays, the lost accounts. Victoria's crafted a whole narrative that you sabotaged the company before you left." I stir my coffee. That would have required planning, something I didn't have time for, given the 10-minute notice of my termination. "I know, but here's what you don't know." Ella Lehner leaned in and lowered her voice. "Victoria was brought in specifically to slash costs and prep the company for a fast sale. The investors want out within 18 months. They need to show consistent 20% margins. Iron Veil was already profitable, I noted. Not profitable enough for them. Your vendor contracts were too balanced. They safeguarded both parties." She opened her tablet and showed me a spreadsheet. "Look at these targets. They need to squeeze another 12% from the supply chain. I examined the numbers. Impossible. Not without slashing quality or switching to overseas suppliers, which would cause months of production gaps and ruin Ironvale's reputation for reliability. There's more, Ella Lehner said. Victoria didn't fire you because of your leadership style. She let you go because you were the only one who would have challenged these targets. The rest of us were kept in the dark until after you were out. So that's why it was done so publicly. I realized. A warning to everyone else. Exactly, Ella Lehner nodded. And it worked. No one speaking up. So why tell me all this? She shut her tablet. Because I handed in my resignation yesterday. I refuse to be a part of what's coming next. She hesitated. There's a board meeting next week. They're going to consider emergency actions, including potentially closing the St. Paul facility and moving production to Mexico. That's 200 jobs gone. Harold won't let that happen, I said. Harold's under pressure to sell his remaining shares. They're making it very hard for him to say no. I walked Ella Lehner to her car, thanked her for the insight, and drove directly to Harold's house. I found him in his garage, working on an old motorcycle. They're planning to dismantle the company. I told him, sharing everything Ella Lehner had disclosed. Harold put down his wrench and wiped his hands on a rag. I've been feeling the pressure. Those bastards want my shares at 10% below market value. Don't sell. Easy for you to say. You're not getting daily calls from their attorneys. I leaned on his workbench. What if there was another way? What if Wysan acquired Ironvale instead? Harold stared at me. You're serious? Julie is looking to grow. She needs more manufacturing capacity. Ironvale needs leadership that respects what it built. It makes sense. Victoria's investors would never sell to you. Too much pride involved. They would if Ironvale was on the brink. If their only shot at recovering any investment was a fire sale. I locked eyes with him. How long until the cash flow issues hit crisis level? Harold thought for a moment. At the current burn rate? 6 weeks. Maybe 8. And if key vendors kept having capacity problems? If more clients followed Braxton out the door? A slow grin spread across Harold's face. Colin Drake, you calculating son of a gun. I'm not proposing anything unethical, I clarified. Just speculating about market conditions. Of course, Harold nodded. Purely hypothetical. That night, I composed an email to Julia outlining a potential acquisition. One that would solve our capacity constraints while granting access to complementary product lines and long-standing client relationships. I wasn't orchestrating Ironvale's demise. Victoria was, and her investors were doing that all on their own. I was simply positioning WeOwn to step in and gather the remains, preserving those 200 jobs in the process. Over the next month, I devoted my full attention to strengthening WeOwn's internal operations. We implemented improved inventory management, optimized production workflows, and established defined quality standards. More significantly, I rebuilt supplier trust using the same strategy that had been effective at Ironvale: personal engagement, mutual benefit, and long-term perspective. Meanwhile, Ironvale's situation unraveled precisely as I had anticipated. Not due to any interference on my part, but because of Victoria's relentless cost-cutting and detached vendor strategy, which led to inevitable consequences. 3 more clients just froze their orders this week. Brian texted me. Production's down to 40%. Layoffs have begun. I forwarded the update to Julia, adding it to the acquisition proposal I was putting together. While she had been hesitant at first, she was beginning to come around as the financial advantages grew more evident. If we're going to act, it needs to be soon, she replied, before their value drops too far. That Friday, I received an unexpected visit at WeOwn. Thomas Franklin, my contact from Felwyn Security, arrived unannounced. Got time for lunch? He asked. Over sandwiches at a nearby deli. He explained the reason for his visit. We're pulling all our business from Ironvale. Can't depend on them anymore. Sorry to hear that, I replied, and I meant it. Despite everything, I took no satisfaction in watching capable people suffer under poor leadership. We need a new supplier, Thomas continued. Someone who can consistently deliver what we need. No drama. Someone like WeOwn. I set my sandwich down. We don't currently manufacture the same parts Ironvale does. But you could, Thomas smiled, with the right tools and know-how. Hypothetically, yes. What if I told you Felwyn is ready to commit to a 3-year contract with substantial volume guarantees, enough to justify setting up a new production line? This wasn't just a new opportunity for WeOwn, it was strategic leverage in the acquisition. A guaranteed client would enhance the value of Iron Vale's facilities and workforce to us. I need to talk it over with Julia, I said, but it's definitely compelling. That afternoon, I brought the proposal to Julia along with the latest on Iron Vale's decline. She made her decision. Make them an offer, she said, but do it through Harold first. Feel them out before we reveal everything. That evening, I called Harold and laid out the plan. He would approach Victoria's investors, posing as a concerned former owner with access to a potential buyer, a party ready to purchase Iron Vale at a reasonable, though reduced, price. I won't mention WeOwn or you at first, Harold confirmed. Just test how desperate they are. Exactly. 3 days later, Harold rang back. They bit quicker than I thought, he said. Hardly pushed back. They're anxious to sell before next quarter's numbers go public. Did they ask who the buyer was? Of course. I told them it was a private investment firm. They didn't press. They're too focused on stopping the bleeding. We moved fast after that. Julia assembled our acquisition team, and I provided in-depth data on Iron Vale's facilities, capabilities, and remaining strengths. We structured the deal to keep as many employees as possible. People I knew personally, people whose expertise and loyalty had been squandered under Victoria's regime. 2 weeks later, with the preliminary deal in place, the time had come to disclose WeOwn as the buyer and me as the strategist behind the acquisition. The meeting was scheduled for Monday morning at Iron Vale's headquarters, exactly 3 months to the day after my very public firing. I chose my suit deliberately, not to impress Victoria, but out of respect for the occasion. This wasn't about revenge. It was about rebuilding. I entered Iron Vale's conference room at precisely 9 o'clock, followed by Julia and our legal team. Victoria's expression when she saw me was worth every sleepless night over the past 3 months. What is this? She snapped, looking from me to Harold, then to her investors. Mr. Drake is here representing the acquiring firm, Harold replied smoothly. This is absurd. Victoria shot to her feet. We're not selling to him. The lead investor, a wiry man named Jeffrey Pearson, cleared his throat. The preliminary agreement has already been executed. Bowworks is purchasing Iron Vale's assets. Mr. Drake will be leading the integration. You can't do this, she insisted. He's the reason we're in this mess. He sabotaged our vendor network. I remained standing, hands calmly behind my back. I haven't reached out to a single Iron Vale vendor since my departure. I'd be happy to supply call logs, emails, and sworn affidavits to confirm that. Then explain the situation, she challenged. What you're experiencing, I replied, is the natural outcome of treating business partnerships as transactions instead of relationships. Those vendors didn't need me to tell them how little you respected them. Julia stepped forward and took the lead. We're here to finalize the acquisition terms. WeOwn will assume majority ownership, and Harold will retain his current stake. The Iron Vale brand will remain, and as many employees as operations could reasonably support. Victoria turned to Jeffrey and the other investors for backing, but found none. They were minimizing their losses, and she had become just another liability to offload. What about me? She asked at last. Julia glanced at me, then back at Victoria. Your services won't be required during the transition or afterward. Victoria gathered her papers, hands trembling. You orchestrated this from the start, she accused me. You set me up to fail. I shook my head. No, Victoria. You did that on your own. When you decided relationships didn't matter, when you dismissed 7 years of work without taking the time to understand it. She exited the room without another word. The investors remained, eager to finalize the deal that would recover at least part of their investment. I didn't feel victorious, only a quiet sense that fairness had finally prevailed. 6 months later, I stood on the production floor of the newly unified WeOwn Iron Vale operation. We had preserved 185 of the original 200 jobs, merged administrative tasks, and broadened our manufacturing capacity. Most critically, we had re-established the vendor relationships that had once made Iron Veil a success. It required time, trust, and openness, sharing our long-term vision, honoring previous agreements, and forming new partnerships based on mutual respect. The merged company was on course to reach $20 million in annual revenue, almost twice what Iron Veil had achieved at its best. Julia had fulfilled her promise regarding equity, making me a minority shareholder with real stake in the business. As I finished my routine walkthrough, Brian, now our production manager, approached me with a tablet in hand. Midwest Precision just confirmed the revised delivery schedule, he reported. And Valeri Components agreed to the quality upgrade plan. So they're glad we're returning to the old way of working. Good, I said. Let's visit both next month, see the changes for ourselves. Brian nodded. By the way, heard anything about Victoria? Rumor has it she's consulting for a private equity firm in Chicago. Last I heard, I said. Think she learned anything from all this? I consider the question as we passed by workers assembling lab instruments beside robotics parts, the integrated product lines that now gave us a competitive advantage. Probably not the right lesson, I answered finally. People rarely do. That night, I stayed late reviewing our plans for the next expansion. Harold dropped in on his way out, fishing gear slung over his shoulder for a weekend trip. You prove your point, he said, leaning in the doorway. Built it back better than ever. Wasn't about proving anything, I replied. Harold smirked. Sure, Colin, whatever helps you sleep at night. After he left, I returned to my paperwork, though my thoughts drifted to that afternoon on the Mississippi, watching barges fight against the current. Sometimes, going with the flow isn't the solution. Sometimes you have to resist, not out of anger or revenge, but with quiet resolve. I hadn't intended to ruin Victoria or take control of Iron Veil. I had simply refused to let good work be erased by someone who couldn't recognize its worth. That was all the retribution I needed.